Todos muy bienvenidos a este tercer webinar que es parte de
May you be very welcome to this third webinar. This is a series of trainings that we are developing for all the educators on the World Day of Migratory Birds. For those that don't know me, my name is Leticia Andino. I'm the coordinator of the campaign on the World Day of Migratory Birds for Central America. So welcome to everybody in Central America, South America, Mexico, the Caribbean, North America, and from the different places that are being joining today. I am going to present today in my screen what we're going to see today. We're going to get to see a little bit about our focal camp species for our campaign, the group of insects, and also the group of birds. In our group, we also have other coordinators from other areas and other regions. Laura Babula from the Caribbean, Miguel Mata, who is the general coordinator of the campaign and also coordinator of South America. And we also have Alex Droff, who's going to be with us today as well. Give me just a minute. Can you see my screen? Yes, we can. Okay, let's get started then with this presentation, which is about knowing a little bit more about the focal species that have been selected for the campaign for the World Day on Migratory Birds, and also the insect. As you know, this annual campaign is trying to raise awareness, the importance of maintaining the habitats of migratory birds. So each year we take on a topic, a different topic for conservation. So here's some of the topics that we have taken on since 2018 to 2023. For example, the campaign on pollution through plastics. This was about becoming aware and sensitive to how plastics, especially plastics of one use, is affecting many birds, specifically those in the water. In 2022, we also saw a topic that was quite interesting, which is the light pollution and how this affects the migration of birds, specifically those that migrate during the night, and also how it affects those resident birds during the reproductive stage. During 2023, we saw the topic on water that is vital to birds. And we also saw some of the actions that we could take on from our homes, our community, our jobs, so that we could actually provide a more amicable environment for birds. Now we go to 2024, which is to protect the insects, to protect the birds. As you can see here in this poster that we designed, there's the different species that have been selected as representatives of the different regions. Some of you participated in some of the formats that were filled out to select these birds, and these were selected as representatives of the different regions of the hemisphere. Amongst them also are insect species. So we're going to start seeing each and every one of them in this presentation. This illustration is thanks to our artist, Anna Rose, who's our artist of 2024. She was picked in her ability and experience to depict birds and insects. All right, to give you more about the context of why this topic was selected, I am going to show you some of the points that relate to this group of insects and birds. One of the key points is that many birds that are feeding of insects are disappearing at the same time in the same places. Many of the scientists think that since the population of insects is decreasing, then the population of birds that consumes these insects is also decreasing. Number two, almost all of the birds give insects for food when they reproduce. So the hatchlings, which at the first phase of their growth have a hard time to consume the seeds, then they're given insects by the birds, the parent birds. So the insects become each and every year harder to find. This is due mainly to human activity, the change of the growth of agricultural frontiers, the use of pesticides, among other changes in the soil. Also, migratory birds capture some insects while flying, others in the soil, others in the water. So finding them in many of these environments, in these spaces that usually these insects are, have been polluted, or as I told you before, they are being used to, there's been use of pesticides. So this decreases the population of insects in different places, places that birds tend to go or have the knowledge to go to find food. Point number five, sorry, is the generalized use of pesticides called neonicotinoids. These are the type of pesticides that are used and that are a problem for insects and birds. Also, in the last 50 years, the birds that depend on insects, which is about 304 species, these have diminished drastically in the last few years. And also, most of the diet of young birds that are migrating is constituted by mainly butterflies and moths. These are a great source of protein and other nutrients that are needed. These are the focal species that we picked in 2024. These are 7 species of insects and 7 species of birds. We're seeing the generalities of each and every one of them. So we're going to start with the group of the insects. Okay. As you can see this in this slide, is the giant cicada. Here in El Salvador, we call it chicharra. I don't know how it is called in other countries, but this one is mainly found in the center, northwest, and northeast of Argentina, as well as in most of the continent, the hemisphere, and it can come all the way to Venezuela and Mexico. The giant cicada are usually consumed by birds, but also some predator birds, as well as other species. The chant of the giant cicada could reach up to 96 decibels. This is their call for reproductive activity, and it's also been compared in its strength to fans, motors, and other type of. Their larvae can remain for years under the earth, feeding off the roots of plants, and it's a quite important food for different species of birds, just like the ones I just mentioned. The other species that you can see is called Caballito del Diablo. It's from the Odonata order. It's distributed in Canada, called vivid dancer. And also you can see it in the United States and in Mexico. You can see it in the middle and the basically where the rivers are being born in different springs or wells. The male is like in the picture, this really bright blue color, and the female can be brown. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that many people call this group dragonflies, but this is a different group. And you can compare it in the photograph that dragonflies place their wing in an horizontal fashion, and the disposition of the eyes and the body, for example, it's thicker than the vivid dancer. They have really strong jaws, and they are quite important in the control of mosquitoes, and they could be predators of other smaller insect species. The specialists are convinced that without the presence of these type of insects, and as well as dragonfly, we would be in dire need, um, basically given the plagues of smaller insects that transmit some very contagious diseases. So going to the next, we have the willow sawfly. These and from the order that Imenteronoptera, the gender is Nematus. Each larva could eat from 1 to 2 weeping willows leaves during their lifetimes. As you can see here in the picture, this is how they grow when they have fully grown. So we have a picture of the larvae and then a fully grown picture. And what we have below is the giant water scavenger beetle. This one can live both in land and water, feeds of other insects and smaller larvae, and needs fresh water to reproduce. The adults create a sort of air bubble underneath their wings. This is they become hardened and they could be used while they're underneath the water, and those become connected to this bubble of air, and that is how they can take on the oxygen from the air. These are very important because they control the population of other water organisms have been traced along with them. Other of the focal species that we have is called the mayfly. Comes from the Ephemeroptera order. The mayflies reproduce in shallow lakes
orgánica.
that have very much of an organic matter at the bottom. This is the kind of nutrients that they need during their short lives. And when they emerge from the water, they emerge in great groups, large groups, and this is how they become into very important foods for birds such as the hummingbirds. On the other hand, you also see below what is called the Wasser midge. This is a type of mosquito that doesn't bite, but that it is found in areas of the northern hemisphere. The larvae of this species is a very important part of the food chain. Once the mosquitoes emerge from the water, they are also known as blind mosquitoes. They sort of look like a mosquito, but they don't bite humans. As you can see in the picture, the male, the adult male, is distinguished from the female, given the sort of feather antenna that they hold. These that these sort of antennas, they look like feathers. You can find them in ponds, ditches, lakes, anything that is rich of organic matter. And they are very important during the reproduction of migratory birds in the Arctic. Another species that we have as a focal species is the red-legged grasshopper, also from the Orthoptera order. This is one of the most common grasshoppers in North America. It's the same order as crickets and grasshoppers that are the most predominant and hold a great amount of protein compared to other insects. When they're in their youngest stage, they look like the adult, but they're just smaller. The nymphs are quite important for the chicks in their short um in their young phase of growth, and they are also found in grassy areas, lowlands, and some crops. So these are all the species that we have called focal species of insects from our campaign. Now let's go to the focal bird species. Let's go first with the Anaconda nighthawk. We have many names in El Salvador for this species. It's native from South America. It's an austral migratory bird, neotropical, and you can see it here in its distribution. To the right, you can see the map, which is the distribution area. It has activity during the sunset, at night, the early morning. As you can see, its distribution can come all the way from Colombia, Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, Peru, Brazil, all the way to Argentina. Their diet includes all the different beetles and moths that we have talked about today, and mainly all of the insects that fly. Our other focal species is the cliff swallow. The cliff swallow lives in colonies in great parts of North America. This is a migratory species that flies all the way to Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. You can find it in open areas, semi-open areas, farms, along the rivers, along lakes, as well as in cliffs. You can see when we compare here, these species can become particularly confused because they can come to a point where it's coinciding with another species visits, which is another sort of swallow that has brighter colors. And you can see it in the forehead that they have more of a blue and also a whitish area. And the neck is almost like red or brownish red. And those are the difference from the other swallow that is a similar species. You can find it in certain time of the year in the same areas. The next that we have is the bobolink, or also common in pastures in North America, but it migrates all the way to the south to Bolivia, Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. They feed off grains, and they need the insects to precisely feed their chicks during the early stages. You can find differences between male and female, as you can see in the pictures. The male is a lot darker, almost black. It has a little patch of beige between the head and the forehead, and you see some white in the wings. And the female is mostly brown with some beige areas in the top of the head. We also have another species, a type of duck called wood duck. It's also called the Florida duck or Carolina duck. It feeds off shallow waters, and you can see it in the distribution map. It can go all the way to Mexico and the Caribbean, mostly in the wetlands and marshes. It has a very colorful, and it really calls your attention, all the colors that the male presents. The female is a little more discreet in the coloring. They feed off beetles, flies, mosquitoes, mainly during the reproduction stage. We also have another species that is focal for this year. It's the broad-tailed hummingbird. As you can see in the illustration, the tail can become broadened like that. That's why it's called broad-tailed hummingbird. It is its origin in North America, but it migrates all the way to Mexico and Central America. Um, Even though they feed on nectar, they tend to look for insects as a source of protein. The presence of chemical pesticides and the intense cleanliness of gardens could affect them in the way they reproduce and protect themselves. In this same group, we have a beach bird, which is the semi-palmated sandpiper from the family of the Scolopacidae. They have a short beak, a little thick. It's sort of lineal and darkened. They feed off shallow waters and of insects that are commonly found in the water, such as flies and larvae. It migrates from North America all the way to the Caribbean, Central and South America. We have other similar species that are common in the tundra. I'm not going to go a lot into details about this species because our next presenter, our guest, is going to tell us a lot about them. One, when we're in the field, we can confuse this species, but we'll know more about them in a little bit. We have a predator bird from the Falconidae family. It's the American kestrel. This is very common to watch in our Central American region. It has a worldwide distribution. It's the most common falcon um, in the hemisphere. It is the insects that are the main component of their diet. It comes up to 82.33%. especially during the reproductive stage and during the different stops that they make during their migration. As you can see, the male is a little more colorful and the female has little more discrete colors. Those were all of our focal species. Now let's talk about the threats. This slide helps us understand the different threats that both insects and birds are facing. Let's start with the degradation of their habitat and the loss of it. This is one of the main impacts, as well as the use of chemical products for human food crops. Also, the climate change, extreme heat is not something that these species can bear. And also, some of the bird species that require insects in their first stages of life, they have decreased in numbers because of the decreased number of insects for food. And one of the simple actions that we could execute in our home, in our community, to protect the insects and the birds is as follows. One of them, to maintain amicable gardens for insects, support organic agriculture where there is no intense use of pesticides, to minimize the destruction of habitats, maintain the leaves on the ground. This is important to not pick up the leaves so that these insects can reproduce because they are the food of the birds. Also to maintain clean water using eco-friendly products because if we do not, the products can contaminate the water and affect the birds. Also, we need to support amicable initiatives with pollinators. So any policies that are geared towards the conservation of habitats for insects and pollinators, also to share everything that you have learned with friends and family, anything that you can learn in these trainings and in other spaces, as well as appreciate the insects for their benefits. Some people find them scary or they may feel, they see the group of insects as not something nice. But once we know the different benefits that we have or that the way we benefit as humans because of their presence, then this can shift our perception. All the information that we just shared, you can find them at this link. It's this platform called Trello.com. And there's other actions that you can take to protect these species that we went over. There is also other resources that you can find online on this link. And just to remind you that the second Saturday of May and the second Saturday of October are considered to be the days to celebrate these World Days for migratory birds. Of course, it can vary according to the region and it can vary according to the feasibility within your group. So this is all part of the topics of this year in order for us to become more aware of the need to conserve and protect these species. If you need any other information, this is the slide with our contact. We have Daisy DeBell in the United States and Canada. We have Miguel Mata in South America, Laura Badbula in the Caribbean, Leticia Andino, which is me in the Central America region, and Daniela Sosa in Mexico. Thank you very much for your attention. You can go ahead and send your questions in the chat right now. And at this point, we're going to give the mic to our special panelist of today. This is Erika Reyes from the Quetzalli group in Nicaragua. She's going to tell us more about some of these focal species that we talked about and some of the efforts that they are bringing about in their region for this species. So I am going to stop sharing my screen to give a space to Erika Reyes. Go ahead, Erika. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. All right. And the presentation, if you could please tell me you can see it. Yes, we can see it. Okay, perfect. Good evening. Thank you very much for this invitation. It is my turn to talk about the specific focal. It's a beach bird, a small one from as you can see, the neck is quite short and it's also a small head. During the reproductive phase, you can see a brownish color in the back or even gray. The abdomen is white and the feet are black. It allows through a membrane to maintain themselves standing in the muddy areas and also make sure that they do not sink in those muddy areas and can feed themselves. All the way from the base of the peak to the top, it's a rounded peak. It's not too fine. During the reproductive stage, this species will have from 3 to 4 eggs. During the migration, we could go over 4,000 kilometers without resting. They feed off insects, worms, even crustaceans, shellfish, and also larvae from a mosquito called the Chironomus muscosus. And this species has suffered loss of numbers given a series of different factors, and it is considered threatened because the population is decreasing. The size of this species is between 13 to 15 centimeters. The habitat that they tend to visit during the reproductive stage is the tundra in the Arctic. And they also go to the marshes in the steres, estuaries, and wetlands. Large adult individuals of this species that have been studied, you can find them in the delta of the Royal Estuary. With the counting that was done, they found that 1% of the population of this species reproduces there. And we can also find them in some wetlands like the Guayabo wetland, but we find them in smaller quantities there. We find it mostly in the coastal areas. Sincerely, beach birds is can be a quite challenging group to identify the different species. For example, we have 6 other species that look very much like our species, and you can see the different similar aspects. But what is the main difference? The Calidris minutilla is smaller and the legs are yellow. The peak is a little longer and finer. With the Calidris maui, this is another species that tends to be confused with the Calidris cusila, but the Calidris mauri is a little bigger than the cusila. The peak is also much bigger, and as you can see, the base of the peak in the Calidris mauri is thicker, but the peak ends up quite fine. They also have black legs, and they tend to be confused with the male. The Maori male is confused with the Calidres pusilla, which is a species we have as focal species. Another species that could confuse with the pusilla is the Calidris alba. The difference with this one is that Calidris alba is bigger, is wider, and the peak is also black, but it's easier to distinguish because the body is a little wider, heavier than our species. Another species that tends to be confused with it is the Calidris fusicolis. This Calidris fusicolis is a lot bigger than the fusila. And if you can see in the image in the chest area, it has sort of like some like stripes, and this is something that our species does not have. At the base of the peak, it has an orangey color, and the Calidris pusilla does not have that. This species also, the Calidris pusilla, can be confused with the Calidris bairdi. The Calidris bairdi is also a species that is bigger than the Calidris pusilla. And if you can see, if you can observe in the image, the wings of the Bairdi, what stands out is that the wing is bigger than the tail. And in the case of the Pusilla, it's not like that. The peak is black as well, but it is a little finer and longer than the Calidre Pusilla. And when you see the big herds of the calidris, it can be complicated when you start seeing all these different characteristics, makes it easier to identify it. Now I would like if you could please in the chat tell me which there are some arrows in orange and other arrows in purple. I would like to ask you which one is the Calidris pusilla? The purple arrow or the orange purple or the orange arrow? You just write the color, the one you think it's our species. However you can identify it. If you can see in the image, in the left image to the right, I'm sorry, to the left, upper left. It's very difficult to identify when they're all in great groups like this one in the image. But as you can see, and as I was telling you, according to the characteristics of each of these species, you can um, you can identify them as you go. This species I was mentioning earlier is a smaller species than the Pusilla. The peak is a little longer and thinner. So I would like to see in the chat which one is Arcalidris pusilla. Is it the yellow or the purple? And going again to the threats, as this, it was, we know that in the case of Nicaragua, given the rain, there's a lot of chemicals being used in the agriculture, and all of those chemicals just get taken to the ocean during the big rain season. And this can, given the storms and the floods, what happens is that a lot of these migratory species can die along the way through also the alteration of their habitat. Birds are very faithful to a space and a specific locations. And when they arrive and they find all this pollution, they don't find other places to rest. They don't find places to feed. And that is how Calidris pusilla has been decreasing in population numbers. And also, another threat is the use of the biological resources. A lot of these birds can also be hunted, you know, and their food can be used as part of the resources that are being consumed by humans. So there's been a series of studies that have been carried out during 22 years, and it's been demonstrated that 30% of the population of these species has been lost. Right now, the population, it's 2,275,000 individuals. In Nicaragua, as Quetzalli, what we've been doing is a series of work to produce conservation of these beach species, specifically Calidris pusilla. We've been putting together census for Pacific migratory birds, as well as water water birds in the Caribbean. We've been reviewing different spaces, wetlands, marshes, beaches, and where we've seen the biggest quantity of Calidres pusilla has been in the Royal Estuary in Nicaragua. It's a very important environment on an international level. You can find the 1% of these species there. And let me show you a graph here. In 2012 to 2024, we can see in 2012, it was counted 7,000 of these individuals. And this is how this royal estuary was named, an important space for birds, for migratory birds on an international level, and also as an amicable space for migratory birds. They've been working in the shrimp farms where we have requested and asked shrimp companies if some of the spaces they don't use in their shrimp farms, if they could allow the birds to be there. We have told them how the walls can be amicable for this beach species. And because in previous years we found that when the tide is surging, what we see is that they go to these shrimp farms to for refuge, and they use the walls to rest. So what we've been doing is putting together this work of awareness with the shrimp farms and the people related. to these spaces to make them more of amicable spaces for this species to take refuge. We've also reached out to some organizations like Font Blue and others, Manomer, for example, PAO Nicaragua, Bird in Nicaragua, and through them, we've been contributing a little bit in the conservation of Calidris pusilla and also other beach species. Another important piece of information that other organizations have produced in the conservation is this international conservation program connecting the dots. This comes from the Audubon Society in New Jersey. The monitoring that they do helps us know the tendency of the population along the natural composition of the spaces. So what they're doing is bring about formation and capacity building of researchers from other parts of the hemisphere for them to participate in these sightseeing campaigns. And us as Quetzalli, we've had the opportunity to participate. Yolegue, Salvador Morales, they have had the opportunity to travel all the way to Delaware, which is another important space for this species because there is where they feed off the crustacean species, specifically a type of crab from the wetlands of Delaware, and it helps these species and the different studies that they produce along the time. For these are studies that they are conducted for years and allow them to realize the behavior of the population. And lastly, I have this video. Let me know if you can actually hear what this video is saying. And again, thanking Manomet for the opportunity that has given us to realize a series of studies here in the delta of the estuary, the Royal Estuary in Nicaragua.
Conoce uno de los sitios de parada del playero semipalmeado y cómo nos conectamos varios socios desde Chile, Argentina, Brasil, Nicaragua, México y Estados Unidos para monitorear y proteger a las aves playeras a lo largo de su ciclo de vida. El playero semipalmeado es un ave migratoria que nos conecta. Es urgente que sus hábitats en América del Sur, Centro y en México sean protegidos.
Well, this video was about the experiences that have been lived by many researchers in Delaware when they are bird watching this particular species, especially when they're feeding on the type of crab that they're so commonly feeding seasonally in Delaware. Again, I want to thank Environment for the Americas for this opportunity and to be able to present some of the information that we're doing here in Quetzalli, Nicaragua. And again, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Erika, for the presentation all the efforts that you're putting together are so interesting in Nicaragua and in that area where you've been able to register this species. As we're seeing, is one of the species that its population is decreasing, and that is why we're putting it as a focal species in our efforts of conservation. And also very important and interesting, the way you can compare it to other beach species. Important to know the different aspects that help us identify species, because this is the way the data, the registration that you hold, the documentation of the data can come about. It depends on that identification. So have you been able to see um, any banded or ringed birds? Not in the estuary. We've seen other beach birds like losteros that do have a ringed aspect to them, but not the fusila. The fusila does not hold any ring. I don't know if anybody has any questions. There's so many comments in the chat. Congratulations, excellent, such good job, great experience. Those are the comments in the chat. Good presentation. Congratulations, Erika. Okay. If we do not have any other comments or questions, I just want to thank you all for participating of this webinar. Thank Erika Reyes and Quetzalli, who have supported us, knowing or promoting rather the effort of conservation for the Calidri Pusila, which is one of the focal birds of our campaign for 2024. We will be awaiting for the fourth of our series of this webinar. We want to thank again our artist of this year. On our next webinar, we will know more about this person that was selected for our campaign. Also, please remain alert. We're going to be sharing the link of this presentation, which will be available in our channel in YouTube, as well as the rest of the presentations that have been executed in these sessions, these days of trainings. Thank you very much.